So here it says, what is the future value of an annuity, $3,200 per annum, for 9.5 years, assuming end-of-year payments? The interest rate is 10.8%. It is an effective annual rate. So when we're dealing with a TVM problem, such as this one, the very first step is simply to set up a table where we list all the TVM variables that exist. So at this point, we should be pretty familiar with these. We have PY, or payments per year, CY, or compounds per year, N, or the total number of payments, IY, or the interest rate per annum, and then present value, payment, and future value. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to set up a table kind of like this table. And now with the help of our example, we're going to try to identify a value for each of these variables. So the question begins by asking us, what is future value? Since we're looking for the future value, it should be pretty obvious to us that FV is what we're trying to compute. It then tells us that we're dealing with an annuity of $3,200 per annum. So this is telling us two things. It is not only telling us what the value of the payment is, $3,200, it is also telling us what the timing of the payment is. It is per annum, or just one payment per year. So that makes PY be 1. We realize that this annuity is going to last for 9.5 years. So we can assign a value of 9.5 for N. The interest rate is 10.8%, and it is an effective annual rate. So IY is going to be 10.8. And since it's an effective annual rate, we know that compounds per year are going to be 1. Since there's no present value, we're going to assign a PV of 0. Or when we're using the finance calculators, we're simply going to remember to clear the calculator so that any variables that are not being used have a value of 0 assigned to them as a default. So now that we've identified all the variables that are relevant, the idea is simply to use our finance calculators to assign these variables a value, and then simply to compute the value that is missing. So we can begin by pressing second FV. What that does is that it assigns a value of 0 to each of the TVM variables. Now the order in which you assign these values to the variables is not relevant. As long as you've assigned the value to 6 of the variables, you will be able to solve the one that is missing. So let us imagine we want to start off by changing the PY. To access PY, we're simply going to press second, followed by IY. Notice how on top of IY, it says PY. At this moment, it is going to say PY on the screen, and we're simply going to press 1, followed by Enter. If we press the down or the up arrow, it is going to show you CY. And once again, if we want a value of 1 for CY, we're simply going to press 1 followed by Enter. So now if I press the up and the down arrows, I will notice how PY and CY are both set to 1. Once we've entered something for PY and CY, how do we exit this worksheet? We simply press second, followed by Compute. Notice how on top of Compute it says Quit, and that's how we exit worksheets. Now what we want to do is we want to put these 5 variables with these values. And these 5 variables are simply the TVM variables that go across our finance calculators. We must remember to always press the number first, so like 9.5, followed by the variable, for example, N. So the value first, 9.5, followed by the variable, for example, N. If I want the interest rate to be 10.8, I am simply going to press 10.8, followed by IY. If I want the payment to be 3,200, I will press 3,200 followed by payment. Perhaps 0 followed by present value. And now since we want to compute the future value, we're simply going to press compute followed by FV. Now let us imagine we are not convinced that these values are the correct ones. We can always recall the variables. We can press things like recall followed by n. It'll remind you what you plugged in for n. We can press recall followed by payment. It'll remind you what you plugged in for payment. Recall IY, and then we can just compute the missing variable. So here we get an answer of 4,867.53. And notice how the finance calculator switches the sign from a negative to a positive. And that's simply because we put the payment as a positive, so the future value came out as a negative. But this is normal. As our final answer, we'll just keep the positive version. So there we have it.